Make sure we got it going. All right, it's telling me I'm live here. I'm waiting for it to come up. Here we go. Yay! All right, we got it. Go live. Perfect. Okay. Hi. Hey, Caitlin.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Doing good. Really excited to be here for this today.
Oh, listen, I've got so many questions and I've got personal ones. My audience sent in some really good ones that some are kind of over my head. So
Okay,
I'm
okay.
trusting you know what you're talking about and I'm going to learn so much from you. But for an
Fabulous.
introduction, can you kind of give everybody the rundown of who you are and your background?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Caitlin. I am the technical nutrition marketing specialist for Buckeye Nutrition. So I'm kind of our in-house product expert. I do a lot of collaborating with our research team, figuring out what science backs up our products and what we need to do in order to create more solutions-based products for our customers. So a lot of helping on the social media side and getting to chat with cool people like you and do events like this that are so fun.
That is so awesome. So now in terms of like how you got to where you are in your position right now, how many years have you studied equine nutrition?
Sure. So I went to the University of Wisconsin River Falls, got my bachelor's in equine science there. After that, worked a lot in the industry, the performance horse industry specifically. Spent a couple years down in Texas working for a reining horse trainer and breeding farm.
Wow.
I've been teaching lessons and training horses since I was 16 years old. Is kind of when I started as an assistant
That's
trainer. So I've got a lot of kind of managerial equine experience.
right.
I've had to manage a lot of different horses with a lot of different ailments in my time. So a lot of industry practical experience, which really helps me kind of implement the science and kind of communicate the science and make it understandable and digestible for the consumer, for the customer, so that we know exactly what we need to do in order to make the message understandable for them and make sure people can understand nutrition, because nutrition is a tough topic. It's changing every day. There's constantly research being done in the equine nutrition field. So it's no surprise at all and nothing to be ashamed of when you have questions, because it's tough even for the pros to stay up to date on everything.
That's a really good reminder because I come into this and I'm humbled every day because it's like there's so much I don't know. I'm really not ashamed because I feel like I've only been in this, for a year and a half. I don't feel silly, but then there are people who come to me and they're like, actually, I've owned a horse for 5 years or 10 years, or I just bought a horse and I'm really lost. And I saw that in a lot of the questions that came in. So I'm excited to be able to support everybody who's just on the wild ride of feeding horses because
Yes.
I have learned in this short year there are so many things that can go wrong, and it really blows my mind actually because it's kind of scary as the owner to know you've got this like fragile being that you're responsible for, and the feed seems to be a huge portion of that.
Yeah, it definitely can be. And while they are fragile, I will say horses are probably from a digestive standpoint, they might be one of the most poorly evolved species out there.
Really.
They don't do themselves a lot of favors. They do have a relatively delicate digestive system.
Mhm.
But the great thing about equine nutrition and where we are currently in the industry and in that field, we have so much research and so much science that we can really safely feed horses these days. There's a
Yeah.
lot of products. There's something out there for everyone, regardless of what you're dealing with or what your horse is going through. There's something out there to fit you, and it's just a matter of being able to tell what exactly that product is and what you need. So
Yeah.
conversations like that help, like this, like what we're doing today, help clear that up for sure for a lot of
Well, I
people.
love that you stepping into that space because a lot of people really want to feel like they're the authority in something. And when you get black and white, especially when it comes to the horses, so far as I've learned, there's no black and white. There's so much gray in between that you just got to be open to that, or you're going to go so far one way and then it will, bite you later, it seems. So, but
Exactly.
I'm okay. So I'm going to start with the basics. These are my questions because
Absolutely.
I want to know, like, okay, my first one was how many times a day are you supposed to feed a horse?
Yeah. So gold standard across the industry, what we know from science is that our horses do best from a digestive health standpoint if they have forage in front of them at all times. That's kind of optimal for their gut health. That's not always possible for all management situations though. Some boarding barns don't have the capability to feed hay free choice 24/7. But kind of as a base rule, it's best to have your forage spread out into as many meals possible per day, or to give them kind of free choice access so they can go and eat when they feel like it, step away when they're not feeling it. And then as far as your grains and like actual feed concentrates or ration balancers, when you're feeding volumes over like 2 pounds per day, it's good to split those up into multiple daily meals. It's kind of the best thing we can do for them is not dump a whole bunch of grain into that system all at once. So typically for feed concentrates, we recommend at minimum 2 meals per day, which is pretty standard through the industry. Typically people are feeding once in the morning, once in the afternoon. And then when you get up to those harder keepers or those horses who are really performing hard, that's when we start to see maybe adding a lunch meal in as well, or maybe even like a night check meal. So sometimes those horses will need those big daily volumes divided up into 3 or 4 meals. But overall, the more we can keep forage in front of our horses, the better.
Okay, because I had heard of forage first, if that's
Mhm.
correct. And so I think that's like prioritizing the hay or out on a pasture before you
Exactly.
implement grain. So then I'm guessing when it comes to grain, you don't want to give free access to that. What I mean, what would happen? Like, are horses? I feel like dogs. I know some dogs will overeat and they'll get themselves sick. Is that kind of the same application for horses and how they behave with feed?
Can definitely gorge themselves on grain, very similar to a dog. And the big problem with that with horses is they can't throw up. So once it's down, it's down.
Oh,
They've got to digest it and have it come out the back end. So the biggest problems we see in those situations where horses do gorge themselves on grain, they bust out of their stall, break into the feed room, what have you. Our biggest concerns are colic as well as laminitis, which is inflammation of the connective tissue in their front feet. It's a really painful condition. And both colic and laminitis can be deadly in severe circumstances. So it's something that we do want to be really proactive about when that situation does happen. But it's no different than for us if we eat, I mean, 15 pounds of candy, we're going to be in some pretty significant
except we're
pain.
able to vomit and horses can't. I've
Exactly.
never heard that. That's fascinating, but sad too. It's kind of scary, you know.
Yeah, it
Oh,
can be, and they can get themselves in a pickle in that situation. I
yeah.
mean, there's some out there that love to put things in their mouth that absolutely do not belong there.
Mm,
So if they'd be able to get something like that down, it's a colic risk. If they break into the feed room, it's a colic risk. When they eat that much grain at once, that's a lot of starch and sugar coming into their system in a very concentrated dose. That can really wreak havoc on that digestive system as well. So that's why it's also equally as important to spread out those big grain meals into multiple sittings throughout the day, just so that we're not
right,
shocking their gut with a
right.
massive influx of all of that at once.
Interesting. So I'm thinking from the perspective of, I like to daydream that I'm going to buy a horse tomorrow and what I would want to know. So first I would be curious, and I had written down that I wanted to know, how do you know how much you feed them? But first, before we go into that, like, how you get a horse, and I'm sure you have to kind of adjust them to the feed or go ahead and get what they've previously been on. But what signs are you looking for them to colic if it is, something feed related?
Yeah, absolutely. So colic can happen for a variety of reasons. It's not always related to feed. It can happen due to dehydration. They can just get a really goofy
Oh,
gas bubble in their gut. So there's lots of different reasons it can happen, but typically the symptoms that we'll see with colic is our horses will often be trying to roll a lot. A lot of times if they get down on the ground and roll around, they can shift that gas bubble around and help it kind of make its way out a little sooner.
mhm.
they'll be looking at their sides. They might be biting at their flank area. They might be laying down really quietly. If they're laying down quietly, that can also be a sign of colic. Some horses are a little more stoic than others, and they won't thrash around like others will. They'll kick up at their tummy. They might get sweaty. Those kind of things are often what we'll see with colic. And typically, there's few horses out there that are truly stoic. If you have a horse that's colicking, a lot of times they're showing you something that lets
They're
you
gonna
know.
let you know. Okay.
Yeah.
So, in terms of knowing how much you feed a horse, if you are doing forage first and you want that free access, I think is how you referred to it,
Yeah.
with the grain, how do you know how much to give them if you do end up giving that to them?
Absolutely. So each product legally is required to provide feeding directions right on the packaging. So it's
Okay.
either printed similar to your dog foods and your cat foods. It's typically printed right on the back of that bag, or it'll be sewn onto the feed tag, which is often included on the bottom seam, sewn onto the product, sewn onto the feed bag. So that's the first place to check. A lot of times those feeding directions will even tell you how much forage your horse should be consuming alongside of it. Everything that we do in regards to feeding horses and feeding amounts is done by weight. For an average size 1,000-pound horse, they should be consuming at minimum 15 pounds per day. That's 1.5% of their body weight a day as forage. And that can be hay or pasture, doesn't have to be hay. But that's what the science has shown us is the healthiest for their gut and keeps their gut in the best shape. So making sure you're meeting that 15 pounds a day or that 1.5% body weight, and then whatever product you're choosing to feed, make sure that you're feeding it to the minimum recommended weight amount for their body weight and their workload. And then you know all your boxes are checked.
So there was something that I've heard a lot of people talking about that is like watching the weight fluctuations. And
Mhm.
it just sounds kind of wild to my brain to be like, you've got a 1 ton animal or more. And how do you know they've lost a couple 100 pounds other than when it gets to the extreme point? Maybe it's a trained eye thing, but like, how do you know that they've lost weight to be kind of ahead of the curve before something happens?
Absolutely. So there's a lot of really helpful tools out there that are designed specifically just for this.
Hmm.
My favorite tool to have just kind of on hand in the barn is a weight tape. It's
Oh,
essentially a measuring tape. You wrap it around your horse's belly where your girth
that's
would
cool.
go.
Yeah.
And then that gives you an estimate on their weight, depending on what that measurement is. It's not going to be 100% accurate, but it's a really easy tool that you can throw on your horse every other week or something like that,
Okay.
just to track how their weight's fluctuating. You can see, oh, maybe they're 50 pounds heavier this week, or maybe they're 50 pounds lighter this week. And that way, if you're starting to see a trend up or a trend down, you can make some adjustments.
Okay.
Yeah, another really helpful tool is body condition scoring. So, this is kind of a standardized guide that we
Okay.
use to assess a horse's kind of fat covering across their body in different areas. We have a really helpful rubric for this on our website. It tells you exactly what parts of their body to look at, and what kind of it's a scoring system from 1 through 9, 1 being extremely emaciated, 9 being extremely overweight.
Okay.
And you can find that resource on our website under our resources tab. It's called the Body Condition Scoring Guide. It's a really, really great way to use your eyes to look at your horse, and then also use your hands to feel where those areas of their body have some fat covering. And then you can score them based on that rubric and track how they do over time that way as well.
That is really cool. I was envisioning some like massive scale.
those
You know, have an
those do
actual counter that
exist.
doesn't exist.
Those do
But
exist.
that's really cool. And I love the hands-on approach because the more you know about your horse, the more I feel like you can kind of, beat them to the punch if they're gonna colic on you or have an issue or see that weight fluctuation. And I know that like how you're staying on top of their feed, that just seems like one of the more important things. And when you don't own a horse, you obviously prioritize things that you want to learn about. But for some reason, I was fascinated by the feed and how people approach it and, what are the right and wrong things or tailoring it to like their age. And it's mind blowing that it can be as complicated as it can be. So having something like that where it really makes it easier for somebody, especially someone new, a new owner, to, understand their horse. I love that. So I made note of it. I want to check it out. Okay. So then, are there signs other than weight fluctuation for like knowing that, their nutrition's off?
Yeah, absolutely. Their body can give us a lot of signals outside of just weight gain or weight loss. A lot of times, those things will be changes to their coat condition. If they all of a sudden, if they're typically pretty shiny and all of a sudden they're looking really dull and lackluster, or
Yeah.
they'll even start to have like dry, flaky skin, that can tip us off to some nutritional issues, somewhere to look deeper. Hoof quality can be affected majorly by diet. They'll start to crack or chip their feet if that's not normal for them. And then additionally, their attitude too. If they're having a lot of vitamin and mineral deficiencies, or if they're not getting adequate amino acids or protein in their diet, they can get really, really muscle sore. It can be hard for them to bounce back from strenuous work. So if you're noticing that your horse's attitude is different, if they're typically pretty happy-go-lucky and all of a sudden they're really, really grumpy on you, or the opposite can happen too. If they're usually pretty quiet and all of a sudden they're really anxious or really excitable, that can often tell you that there might be something going on nutritionally too that can be tied back to some kind of deficiency.
Okay. So when I think about like the horse's behavior and their health, and you're looking at the variety of different horses out there and the different approaches, how do you know a horse needs grain or if they can just use forage, assuming that someone has access to that?
Yeah.
How do you differentiate if it's needed or not?
Absolutely. So, as a rule of thumb, all horses need a source of balanced vitamins and minerals. Our forage, by far, we want that to be the bulk of the diet. We want that to do the majority of the heavy lifting in regards to getting their calories into them and being their largest source of nutrition. The hard part with forage is as soon as we cut that hay out of the field, it starts to lose some of its nutritional value from a vitamin and mineral standpoint. It starts to leach out of that hay. That's just the nature of the beast, and it can be
as a plant. Yeah.
Exactly. And it can be drastically affected too by storage practices. If it's not stored well, it can also lose nutritional content faster. So as a rule of thumb, even for your easiest of easy keepers, they're turned out on a pasture, they get nothing else, and they're fat as a tick. Even those guys, they're going to benefit from a ration balancer. Ration balancers are a type of equine feed product that are basically designed just to be the horse's daily multivitamin. They deliver really high quality protein, really high quality vitamins and minerals without any of the additional calories, starch, sugar, fat, without any of that stuff. It's just like our daily multivitamin that we take every morning. It's the same thing for them. So as a rule of thumb, all horses, even if they're the easiest of keepers, would do well with a ration balancer. And then going up from there, it's really kind of understanding what kind of keeper your horse is.
I saw that a lot coming in my questions. Easy keeper, hard keeper.
Yes, exactly. So if you know you have a horse who's historically been a hard keeper, then you're going to have to reach for a product that's higher calorie, so higher protein, higher fat.
Oh.
If you have a horse who's an easier keeper, then you can look at those ration balancers that are just the daily multivitamin, or you can look at a middle of the road calorie content supplement or feed too. That's going to be middle of the road on protein, middle of the road on fat, and just be a little boost in calories versus a giant boost in calories for those performance horses and those hard keepers.
That makes sense, because I had written down a question wondering kind of what you needed to look for in terms of like if it was the right match with knowing the feed, because you said high calorie, high fat. So the hard keeper, they're hard to keep weight on. Is that right?
Exactly. Yep.
Okay. All right.
Yes.
I'm catching up.
No,
that.
Those can be kind of confusing terms. Like hard keeper can be related to nutrition, or a hard keeper, like, is it hard to keep them in a fence? Like that was my question when I first started.
I know, it's kind of like the inside rein, outside leg. And you say it a couple times, like, oh, these limbs. Okay.
Yes.
Hard keeper, they have a hard time keeping weight on. So, okay, perfect. So, are there ingredients outside of knowing that you want higher protein, higher fat?
Mhm.
Was that right? Higher calorie, higher fat for the
Mhm.
hard keepers. Are there other nutritional things you need to look for when you're picking out a ration balancer?
So for ration balancers compared to a feed concentrate, so for those hard keepers and those performance horses, we're often
Right.
going to be picking a feed concentrate. Those products are going to be fed in really, really high volumes in comparison to a ration balancer. Those ration balancers, you're typically feeding a pound to a pound and a half per
If
day.
not much.
Exactly. Those feed
Gotcha.
concentrates are more like the 5 to 6 pound range.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah, and those ration balancers too, because it's such a small serving size, but we want
Mhm.
to get a lot of nutrition into them. It's going to be really high protein, typically around 30 to 32% protein, and then really highly fortified from a vitamin and mineral standpoint too. So if you would put each feed type, every bag of feed has to have a guaranteed analysis on it that tells you percentage of crude protein, fat, fiber, and down the list for the vitamins and minerals. If
Mhm.
you would put the guaranteed analysis of that ration balancer versus that feed concentrate next to each other, you'd see some significant differences. And that's because they're fed in such different volumes
Ratio.
daily.
Yeah.
One's at 1 pounds versus 6 pounds daily, if
Okay.
that makes sense.
No, it does make sense. And I knew I was venturing into a world where there was a lot of foreign concepts and understanding, but that's why I wanted to come at it from a very basic point of view, asking my questions at least. Now, when we get to
Absolutely.
the audience questions, I'll just probably nod and smile. They'll love it. So, okay, other basic stuff I'm really curious about. It's you were talking about storing hay, and it can be applied to hay or to grain, but like, how are you supposed to store it? What makes it stay safe for the longest?
Absolutely. So the big things for hay are going to be out of the sun and in a cool, dry environment. Sun bleaching can have an effect on our hay. So if it sits out in the hay, it starts to, or sits out in the sun, it starts to look really yellow. That
Oh,
doesn't necessarily affect nutrient quality, but if it's being hit by the sun, it's probably being hit by the rain too. So
mhm.
that's when we start worrying about mold, and that rain can actually wash some nutritional content out of the hay as well. So it's going to be storing it up off the ground so it can get airflow under the bales so that the bottom side doesn't get moldy on you.
Okay.
Not pushing it right up against the barn walls, that can trap
Mhm.
moisture as well and cause some molding. So it's really keeping it so that the air can move around it, keeping it out of the sun and out of the rain are the biggest things for the hay. And it's not super different for the feed either. For the grain products, we're going to want to store those in a cool, dry environment and in some type of rodent proof container.
Oh,
That a lot of times can be the hardest part is keeping the rodents out of it, because they love
exactly.
it just as much as the horses for sure. And then as far as how long they'll keep for, it varies from product to product. They have expiration dates just like human food does. So they're only good for a certain amount of time, and that shelf life depends on each product. So that's information
Okay.
that your feed producer is happy to give you to make sure that you're feeding your
Yeah.
horse product that's within date and not expired and all that good stuff.
Okay. When you open a bag, so
Mhm.
with expiration date, but even human food, it'll last till this
Absolutely.
date. But if you open it, it's good for 7 days. Is it kind of the same way with the grain and the feed?
It's not quite similar in that way, which is nice because we work out of an open feed bag a lot longer and it's not
Yeah.
something we can really stick in the fridge. So typically there's not a huge change. The biggest thing is for some of those products that have really high molasses content where the feed's really
Oh, like
wet
the
and
sweet.
sticky.
Okay.
Yes,
Gotcha.
exactly. Once you open that bag, they can start to dry out a little faster. So that's one
Oh,
consideration.
okay.
But for those pelleted products, there's not a super big concern of just kind of the bag being open, causing a lot of problems for them.
Okay. All right. Well, that gave me a good foundation to work from. I kind of feel like I know what I'm talking about. But
Yeah,
I do have some questions from our audience. I'm going to start from kind of the more basic and work up to the more complicated if that works for you.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
so we'll start out with someone else who's pretty new, and she asked me how to get over the fear of giving treats. She only gives her horse carrots because it feels safer. Do you have any tips?
Yeah, absolutely. So most treats for most horses are going to be a safe option unless you know they're dealing with some dental issues.
Mhm.
If they struggle with chewing, if they're missing some teeth due to old age or due to surgery or what have you,
Mhm.
and they struggle with chewing, then treats can be a concern. But most of the time, our horses are able to process treats really well. If we have any horses who have metabolic issues like Cushing's disease or insulin resistance, anything similar to kind of those pony diabetes kind of disorders, then we need to be a little bit more conscious of our treats in regard to their starch and sugar content. But overall, as long as you're chopping your carrots into small pieces, you're chopping your apples into small pieces, that's the best way to reduce the risk of those horses choking. Um, and
Oh,
then
yeah.
and then as long as your treats or as long as your horse has enough chewing surface left, they've got good quality teeth in their mouth, they'll be able to chew up those crunchier ones pretty well.
See, I just learned the other week, this horse that I ride at my barn occasionally, she doesn't do well with like a whole apple. And so I think they cut it in half, or is that kind of common? Is that like just a quirk?
Yeah, it can be a quirk. That's funny you mentioned that because my personal horse, he's 8 years old. He's not old, but he hates taking a bite out of a whole apple. I have to sit there and bite chunks out of it for him because he's just too much of a
You have to
chicken.
bite it.
Yeah, just to take chunks out of it himself.
Oh,
So it certainly can be just a quirky thing. They
okay. So it's
can
not
get
necessarily a
some
bad sign. It's just,
yeah, they can get some dental conditions that can cause it to be painful for them to bite
right.
into hard stuff. But it certainly can just be a quirky, goofy trait as well.
Okay. And then like when it comes to like apples and carrots and stuff, it's just kind of horses have their preferences. It's not necessarily one's better than the other nutritionally. It's just like it's a treat.
Exactly, it's a treat,
Okay.
and it's the same thing as us with treats for us, all good things in moderation, right?
Yes,
So we
someone
don't
asked me if there was too much, if you could do too much of a good thing, and I was like, "It sounds like you should probably consider that, but I don't know, ask the expert."
yeah, you definitely can do too much of a good thing. So if it's a couple carrots a day or an apple a day, that's not concerning for horses who don't have any health issues.
Uh-huh.
But for those metabolic horses who are really sensitive to sugar
Mhm.
in their diet, it can have an effect on those guys. So it's just knowing your horse, knowing what's going on with them. A really good lesson too in not giving treats to horses that aren't yours or that you don't know,
Oh, good point.
just so that you don't accidentally give something problematic to somebody who has a hidden health condition going on.
That's a really good point because even before I had access to a barn to ride at, I would sometimes pull over on the side of the road and pet a horsey and wish I had an apple to give it. So that's such a good
Right.
point to make. So
Yeah.
I have somebody asking, it's from Alexis. She's asking, I have an off the track thoroughbred. What should I feed? She's an easy keeper, but I like your gut grain. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a full line of gut health feeds. They're all going to be feed concentrates. So they're designed to be fed in those higher concentrations, like we talked about earlier. We've our gut health products include marine source calcium, which buffers stomach acid and helps keep stomach ulcers away. They also include pre and probiotics as well as active live yeast cultures. Those are all really beneficial to the area of the digestive tract that does all the fiber digestion. So those keep that area healthy. And then we include super fibers in those formulas as well, so that those pre and probiotics, those healthy bacteria in the gut that digest that fiber, they're just getting some additional extra fuel and food to keep them happy and healthy. So those are the additives we include in those products. All of those products are processed a little bit differently as well. We use a process called extrusion. And basically, what that is it's pressure cooking our horse's feed. It makes it super digestible, super easy to chew. They can get a lot more out of it with less feed volume. So, those products do typically have a little bit lower feeding rate, or they're really a lot more impactful for horses than your typical pelleted feed. So for harder keepers, if they're kind of they need a lot of feed to keep weight on. We've got a performance gut health product. That one's called Equate Performance. For your easier keepers, you'd look at the Equate gut health option. It's a little bit lower in fat and calories overall, so it won't add a whole bunch of weight to them. If you've got a really, really easy keeper, that might even be too many calories for them though. And that's where then you'd look towards that ration balancer, and potentially pairing that with a gut health supplement of your choosing.
Would that end up them being like a trial and error to find out if it's too much for them? Like they watch that weight gain, or is there a
Yeah.
for her to know?
Yeah, it kind of could be. It's one of those situations where if it's easiest for that person to reach out directly to us, we can talk in depth about what the horse's diet looks like currently, and then we can get a really good idea and make a more accurate recommendation as to what will work.
Right.
So if you'd like to reach out, Alexis, you can reach us through our website, www.buckeyenutrition.com. There's a contact us tab there. You can either call into that phone number or fill out the form that gets sent via email, and both of those will come directly to me, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can.
So I've got a question from Charlotte on Instagram, and it kind of flows into my next series of questions, which was about feeding hay to horses. The first one just being from me, what's the best hay to feed? Like, is there a specific type? And then what Charlotte wants to know is she sees a lot of UK riders that feed like steamed hay. I haven't heard of this. So is there a benefit to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So as far as the best type of hay, it really depends on your horse. This is where we're working in that gray area a lot that you were talking about before.
Yeah.
So most commonly in the US, we're either seeing alfalfa hays or grass hays. And alfalfa is typically really high in calories, really high in protein. It's a great option for supporting those hard keepers, for supporting horses who are performing at high levels. It's probably going to be too high calorie and too dense in energy for those easy keepers. It'll probably make them blow up like a blimp on you. But the grass hay, then it's still very high quality, provides a great source of nutrition, but it's oftentimes a little bit lower in protein and a little bit lower in energy. So you can feed more of it without having to worry about super excessive weight gain for most horses. So those are the two different types of hay, and a little bit of a way you can decide what kind of works for your horse. And then as far as the steaming goes, that's a process that's used a lot for horses who might have respiratory issues or have some issues chewing. When you steam the hay, it makes it really nice and soft. It's easier to chew, and also takes a lot of the dust and the mold spores out of it. That can be helpful for those horses with asthma or COPD or any of those kind of respiratory problems. So that's a lot of reasons, and it can increase the digestibility and palatability of some hays as well. When we make them a little bit softer, horses often like to eat them better. So that's probably some of the method to the madness with the steaming the hay for sure.
That's interesting. Well, okay, so then let's talk about like if a horse is on a dry lot. So somebody asked, what do they need if they don't have a pasture? Is it all hay? Like, that is the only alternative.
Pretty much, yep.
Like 15 pounds a day. I can't fathom storing that. Oh my goodness.
So a good way to think about it is typically most of our hay bales in the US, there's at least in the Midwest, our typical bale of hay is going to weigh between 40 and 50 pounds most of the time. So when you think about that 15 pounds of hay, that gives you a little bit of an idea of how much we're talking about. Again, that 15 pounds is bare minimum in order to keep their gut system healthy. So most horses, ideally, we would want to see around that 20-pound range if we're looking for them to maintain weight. And then in free choice hay situations, they'll oftentimes eat closer to 2.5% of their body weight. So that 25-pound region. But when those horses are on a dry lot and don't have pasture access, it's really hay is your only option then. And just, again, trying to make that last as long as you can. If you're feeding twice a day, you can put it in slow feed hay nets in the morning. So they're just getting to the end of it by the time you get there for nighttime chores. So it's one of those things you just kind of got to figure out what works for you and your horses in that situation and your management style.
Okay. Well, now I've heard of people, and a question came in. It was about cubes. I think, was it alfalfa cubes, or is that something that you're supposed to soak and feed in lieu of a big bale of alfalfa hay?
So they can be used to replace hay entirely. They're a really great option for that in times when there's no hay accessible. If you're in an evacuation situation or there's been
Oh, okay.
wildfires or something like that, we do see a little bit of concern in the scientific side of things, whether or not using them as the sole source of forage in the diet is okay. There's some thought about horses needing that long stemmed hay, those longer pieces of those plants to have optimum gut health. But that has yet to be researched, yet to be proven. They are a great option. They are safest fed when they're soaked.
So it's soaked.
A lot of people don't feed them soaked. A lot of
Okay.
people will feed them dry, but that does increase your horse's risk of choke. So
Soaking. Okay.
yeah, it's one of those things where, especially if your horse has any teeth issues, they struggle with chewing at all, you're going to want to make sure you soak those. But there's people that get by just fine without soaking as well.
Okay. So I had a lot of soaking questions.
Mhm.
Now someone asked beet pulp versus soaked alfalfa cubes for a senior hard keeper who needs to build their top line.
Okay.
Do you have a take on if one or the other is better?
Absolutely. So both of those products, beet pulp and alfalfa, are going to be great sources of fiber. That's something we really want to maximize in our senior horses' diets, just because as they get older, the healthier we can keep that gut system, the better. And how we do that is through maximizing their forage and maximizing their fiber. So those are two really great options to be considering. If you're looking for the horse to build top line, that means we're looking to build muscle in that horse's back. The best option out of those two is going to be the alfalfa, because alfalfa is higher in protein than beet pulp. So they're going to get more amino acids and be able to kind of use those to put into building that top line. In comparison to the beet pulp, it's typically a little lower in protein.
Okay.
Now, with that being said, it's really hard for some senior horses to build back their top line. A lot of times they have to be in work to help strengthen those muscles and bring them back. And some horses, as they age, they lose that top line, and we just can't get it back. It's kind of one of
Right.
those classic signs of aging, but alfalfa cubes or pellets might help bring it back for sure.
Okay. Okay. So then somebody had asked about what your opinion was on soaking grain
Yeah.
specifically. Is that always called for? Do some people serve it dry?
Yeah, yep. You can serve it dry. Pelleted grain products can be fed dry. So can extruded. So can textured feed options. Soaking, in my opinion, is never a bad idea. All it does
Okay.
is get water into your horse and reduce their risk of
Yeah.
choke. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. It sounds like choking is something you have to really be aware of because that that's a big animal to have. Like, what do you do? What are you supposed to do if they choke?
Yeah, it is. It's a scary thing to see or go through. The good news about when horses choke is that they are obligate nasal breathers. What that means is they can only breathe through their nose. So their
Oh,
trachea and their esophagus are two completely separate tubes.
that
So
is fascinating. Oh my
yeah.
goodness. Cool.
So even when they choke, they can still breathe, which is the important part.
Oh,
Choke is still very uncomfortable for them. A lot of times you can actually feel that blockage in their throat.
okay.
So when they choke, a lot of times you might see feed material running out their nose. They have a they have an epiglottis that can get a little stuck when they choke, and that feed, since it can't go down, it comes back out through their nose. So that's common to see when your horse is choking. They might be coughing a lot or extending their head and neck in funny ways, sticking their
Right.
tongue out. They might get sweaty. So those are kind of ways that we get told, essentially, that our horse might be
What's
choking.
wrong?
And
Yeah.
then sometimes they can clear that blockage themselves. Their esophagus has tiny little kind of sequential muscles in it that sequentially kind of contract and move things down that tube. So they can sometimes get them worked out themselves, but in the situations where they can't,
Mm.
a veterinarian will come out and they'll pass a tube up the horse's nose, down through that epiglottis, that flap, and then they can use that tube and push water through to push it down into their stomach.
Wow. So, okay, I had two questions based on what you
Mhm.
just. I can't remember what you called it, that can come back up out the nose. Would that have the potential of blocking their ability to breathe though, if too much came up that way, or is it generally not an issue?
It's generally not an issue of it blocking their airway. Our biggest concern is that it actually goes backwards and ends up in their lungs, because then we have a
Oh,
risk of infection and pneumonia and things like
right.
that. So that's kind of the biggest concern with choke.
Okay. And then you obviously, it sounds like it's an emergency thing, but like, is there a time frame? Like, if you are learning and you feed your horse their feed and then you realize you should have soaked it and then they start choking, how is there a time frame you've got to work with before your vet gets there that you're like, okay, this is not good?
Yeah, so my rule of thumb is if you notice a choke, call your
Mhm.
vet. Let
Right.
your vet know that's happening, that you think your horse is choking. It's going to take time for your vet to get to you anyway.
Yeah.
If your vet gets there and your horse has been able to resolve the choke by themselves, they're
Golden.
never going to be upset. They're going to be thrilled that your horse was able to get through that by themselves. So there's never any harm in calling your vet. And certainly, if waiting too long for your horse to try to resolve that by themselves
Mhm.
can cause problems. You increase their risk for pneumonia. That you increase their risk for they can actually rupture their esophagus. So you don't want to let it go on too long before you get someone there to
Right.
help them out for sure.
Wow, there's so much to know.
I know.
Holy, but it's so good. Like, this is such good information. Okay, so someone has asked, what's the best way to get their underweight horse to gain weight when it has Cushing's? You mentioned Cushing's earlier. I'm not really sure what that is, but they want to know a good way to get their underweight horse to gain weight with Cushing's.
For sure. So Cushing's disease is one of those metabolic disorders that our horses can have. Um, Typically, it's pretty often for to have horses with Cushing's disease be hard to keep weight on as they get older. Part of that disease is that they lose some of their muscle concentration, or they start to lose their muscle quality. So the and An important part of managing a horse with a metabolic disorder like Cushing's is keeping their dietary starch and sugar low. We don't want them
Oh,
consuming too much starch and sugar because that causes more fluctuations in
mhm.
their metabolic status and just kind of puts them in a worse situation. It can increase their risk of laminitis and things like that. So, biggest thing is always make sure your horse is eating enough forage. We want to make sure they're getting enough either pasture or hay every day. If they're not, bump that up. And if we feel like we're lacking in some muscle tone and some top line, you could consider adding in some alfalfa. Alfalfa hay is actually typically lower in sugar than grass hay, so it can be a really great option for those metabolic horses or those horses
Okay.
with Cushing's. And then if you need more help than what forage can offer you, that's when you start to look at those low starch and sugar feed concentrate products that are designed to be fed in that like 5 to 6 pound range daily. There's lots of low starch and sugar options on the market. We have some really great ones. They all live in our Safe and Easy line. Those are the products that would fit a horse like that. And then if you still need help putting weight on the horse after you've implemented one of those Safe and Easy products, then you can start to look for some fat supplements to help bump that fat content up in the diet.
Right.
And those can be really impactful as well for those seniors with issues.
So a fat supplement is something separate that you guys also offer? Interesting.
Exactly.
Okay, okay. Y'all have a lot of different options, and I know that you can really customize it. So anybody that's like looking to get their horse on a feed or understand what their horse needs, they can just reach out and be able to get in contact with you, and you hold their hand through that process.
Exactly. Yep. They can reach out
Awesome.
to us reach out directly to me through that contact us tab on our website, and we can work through every part of the diet. We can go over their forage, go over their current feed or supplements, and figure out what's working, what's not, and what we need to change to get them where they need to be.
That is so cool because one of my questions was somebody just has a slow gainer and they're trying to figure out how to get them to gain more quickly. And you talked about more forage, alfalfa, and then the other options that you can venture down. And I thought, oh, I don't know how she's going to answer that. So they just need to come straight to you in terms of like figuring out where they are and where they need to get.
Exactly. Yep. Those situations, especially with those horses who are really struggling to gain weight, it's
Yeah,
really helpful when people reach out because then we can have a conversation, get a bunch of details. We know what you've tried, what you haven't tried, and then we can usually find something that's going to be the golden
be a
ticket.
solution. I gotcha. So okay, somebody asked a question about something that I don't know what this word means. So,
Right.
best options to support strengthening the stifle along with proper exercise.
Yeah,
Not
absolutely.
the
So
stifle.
the the stifle is one of the horse's joints in their hind leg. It kind of is up almost in the hip region where their flank kind of rolls into their hind end. It's a joint back in that area. And far and wide, weak stifles are often related to exercise. So by far the best way to strengthen them is going to be doing that rehab plan that you've talked with your chiropractor, your body worker, your vet about, whoever it be. But we can support them through adequate nutrition too, because a lot of those soft tissues and those muscles that we're looking to strengthen around that stifle, they can be benefited by high quality protein in the diet because that's what they need in order to strengthen
To
those muscle
build that.
fibers.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I would look at in that situation is making sure that your horse is getting enough protein in their diet. There are 3 amino acids for the horse that are limiting in the diet, meaning if they don't get enough of those 3 specific amino acids, they can't use the rest of the protein we feed them, regardless of how much we give.
Oh,
So it's really important to take a look at those limiting amino acids and make sure that your horse's needs are being met in that regard for sure.
interesting. Okay. I had never thought about amino acids for horses. I've heard
Yeah,
even, of course, it makes sense. Okay. I have two more questions for you if you've got the time. They're both
absolutely.
kind of interesting to me. So the first one was, have you ever heard of feeding 12 hours and then fasting 12 hours? And they wanted to know if it could be okay for a horse. And from what you've taught me so far, it really doesn't sound like it's ideal. And I don't know if there are scenarios where it can work, but what are your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. You'd be correct in thinking that it's not quite ideal. Fasting horses for extended periods of time is actually how we create stomach ulcers for research
Oh,
purposes. So, a lot of horses, when they're on kind of that 12 hours fed, 12 hours off, oftentimes the 12 hours when they get their feed is when there's people at the barn working, and then they're without their feed overnight. Some horses can handle that. But for the majority, we start to see their risk of stomach ulcers drastically increase between 4 to 6 hours without
oh,
access to
wow.
forage.
That
So
is so,
the biggest concern there is when our horses eat hay, when it lands in their stomach, it creates a mat that floats on top of their stomach acid, and it prevents that stomach acid from splashing up onto the
yeah.
stomach and irritating that stomach lining. So if we don't
And
have forage in this,
ulcers, is that right?
correct. Yep.
Okay, so y'all don't do that. It doesn't sound like a good call. It's interesting because
Ideally, we want our horses to have forage as much as possible and at least every 4 to 6 hours.
okay, good to know. So, okay, our last one. This one was kind of worded funly, but is it okay for my yearling AQHA American Quarter Horse? Is that right?
Mhm.
Um,
Yep.
both tall and lanky, but also on the fat side like a seal. Is that okay, or is there something that needs to change in that nutrition for that horse?
Absolutely. So it's really, really common for young horses to go through several ugly duckling phases,
Oh,
where they get really tall and lanky. They get kind of gangly. Sometimes their butt will be higher than their withers. They just
oh, because
grow a
they
little
grow
bit
like this, right?
haphazardly. Yeah, so we don't worry too much about the tall and lanky. We want to make sure they have enough condition on them. We don't want them looking ribby or underweight. But it sounds like this guy is a little bit on the chunky side at the same
It
time.
sounds like it.
And
Like a
we
seal.
don't want them too overweight either, just because any extra pressure on those joints when they're growing just
Right.
causes more stress. So we like to keep them kind of right in the sweet spot, which can be easier said than done with those young horses. They burn a lot of calories when they're growing, but we don't get too concerned about the uneven growth and the ugly duckling phases and looking lanky. That's pretty common.
Power
They
through
even
it.
out over time for sure.
That's so the teenage phase that we all go through.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. I loved learning from you today, Caitlin. Thank you so much for taking the time and doing this. I appreciate it. I know everybody else does too. Can you share how everybody can get in contact with you, where they can find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So www.buckeyenutrition.com, that's our website. The Contact Us tab on there gives you a phone number to call in. You can either call that 800 number and choose option 2 to get pushed through to me, or you can fill out the form on the website that gives us a little bit of information about you, your horse, what you're currently feeding in their nutrition plan, just so that we have an idea of what we're working with. And I'll get back to you through either of those formats as soon as I can.
You are amazing. So brilliant. Thank you so much for taking the time today. And I look forward to talking to you soon.
Yeah, absolutely.